Yeah.
So we're going to move to our final segment. Joining us here again in studio is Gloria Feldt. She is the co-founder and president of Take the Lead Women. And joining us via Skype is Inez Stepman. She's a senior policy fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Happy
Thanks.
to be here.
All right. So we'll start with you, Inez. So we recently had Equal Pay Day, and there are a lot of different statistics out there. Some say women earn 78 cents to the dollar, some say 98 cents to the dollar, and then we have the different variations when it comes to ethnicities, and pay parity. So what statistics should we believe?
Well, that 77 cents on the dollar statistic is really just taking the median earnings of women and comparing them to the median earnings of men, which doesn't really tell us anything about equal pay for equal work, because it's comparing all kinds of different kinds of work, different numbers of hours, even among full-time employees and different college majors, different all kinds of different decision making in terms of balancing, for example, flexibility off against higher salary decisions. So it doesn't take into account what the rallying cry is, which is equal pay for equal work. So that's comparing unequal work. When a lot of those factors are accounted for, most importantly, hours and overtime worked, the danger, like physical danger of the job. So there is often a premium for doing jobs that are dangerous, because obviously people prefer to take jobs that aren't dangerous, so they have to pay more in order to get people to take those jobs. When you control for field, for college major, for all kinds of decision making, that gap shrinks down to 2 cents, and we can't even say that those 2 cents are actually the result of discrimination. There just might be a billion other factors that we can't think of. So we can't conclusively say that even that 2 cent gap is actually due to discrimination for equal pay for equal work. So I think using those statistics to make a point about women in general in the workforce is somewhat misleading. If you want to talk about particular instances of discrimination that women have brought through our courts, since it is illegal to discriminate by sex on for pay, then I think that's fine. But I think using these statistics to paint a general picture of female victimhood is misleading.
Well, I want to bring Gloria into the conversation because Inez mentioned specific cases, and we know Lily Ledbetter, for example, had a specific case where a male colleague was reportedly getting paid more for the exact same work. But what's your response to Inez's argument that there is a big disparity in terms of she mentioned danger, for example. A scholar that I follow, he said if we had equal occupational fatality day where men versus women, because men are much more likely to die on the job, that would have actually been in 2030. So, 20 years from now, if we were going to do apples to oranges.
Right. Well, I think, unfortunately, Inez has just misled us a little bit. As they say, there are lies, damn lies, in statistics, right? And that 77% marker is white women's pay as compared to all men's pay. And as you've noted, there are greater disparities among women of color. In particular, African American women earn 64 cents to the dollar. Latinas, I believe it's like 52 cents to the dollar or something like that. And those are in studies that do compare job for job, experience for experience. Now, there are several reasons for it. And some of the reasons are within our own heads as women, which is why I work a lot with women to try to help them understand that they need to know their value. They need to be able to represent their value to their employers and ask for what they are worth. A lot of this is in the negotiation. Women ask for less in their initial employment compensation. Women don't negotiate as aggressively as men do when they start their careers. And the cumulative result of that is that women lose anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million over the course of their lifetime because everything gets built on that initial negotiation. Why does that happen? In part, it's because of the implicit bias in the system. So there are a lot of systemic reasons. There is still bias, external bias, but there also is what that bias does to our own heads. And so we don't value ourselves as much. In fact, we value, in studies that have been done, we value other people's work at 20% higher than we value our own. What's the pay gap? It's about that 20% when you average it overall. So much of this can be rectified simply by teaching women, number one, know your value, research it. It's really easy to find out what comparable pay is now with all the websites like ZipRecruiter and PayScale and all of those. You can find out what you're worth in the marketplace, and you need to say you are worth that. And so I'd rather work on that end of the problem and not argue about whether there's a problem or not. Let's help women make sure they earn their fair pay.
I think it's very interesting that you brought up the fact that, there's a systemic thought process in women that, we don't ask for the amount that we should be asking for. Actually, this is my first job I've ever had, and I've been working for, I don't know, a long time, where I actually asked for like a significant amount of money. And I was like, this is because I'm worth this much. And it was my first time ever doing it. After being counseled by like many other women. So it's interesting that you said that.
Well, Inez, I want to bring you in, Inez, to give you a chance to respond to Gloria, in particular, first on the issue that she mentioned of racial disparity. What do you see, because you mentioned controlling for all the many other variables like hours worked, occupation, et cetera. What is your read on the racial disparities, and what are the statistics for that? And then also to this question of negotiations.
So first, there isn't any study that I'm aware of that controls for any amount of these really important factors or any number of these really important factors that I mentioned. I think the biggest ones are hours worked, college major and field, number of years in the workforce, and a few others. Those are the biggest ones, but there could be hundreds. I mean, we really don't know. As far as I'm aware of, there is no research that shows a substantial gap, more than a few cents, when those factors are controlled for, between men and women overall. Now, I'm not sure if there has been a lot of research done with those controlling factors between, for example, ethnic backgrounds. That's a different field of research. I'm sure it's out there. I'm just not super aware of it. But as far as I'm concerned, just to make one, sort of technical correction, I do think the 77 cents gap is overall. So it includes, it's not just white women, it's the average of all women. And then if you break it out into racial categories, you get the numbers that we talked about a minute ago. But there, as far as I know, there is no research that says that if you control for those kinds of factors, there's this huge gap between men and women overall as categories. Now, I don't know how that breaks down into the racial categories. But to the second point about women asking for what they're worth, I mean, absolutely, you should always do research, have a good sense of what you're worth in your particular field, given your particular background. But I do worry a little bit about putting this entire discussion into what I see as a fundamentally masculine framework, right? We could just as easily, just as you talked about, the danger gap, right, being until 2030, we could just as easily be having a conversation right now about a time with family gap, right? A time with even with family and friends gap. It turns out that women, when given the freedom to choose, especially since overall America is an incredibly prosperous society compared to all of human history, freed from mostly the constraints of just sustaining the basics, right, of sustenance, women do make different decisions overall than men about how they want to balance work and family. And I think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing. I don't see why the way that men have chosen to lead their lives should be the standard for women, when in fact, I mean, I think there's a good argument to be made that a lot of women and perhaps even a number of men would be happier spending, or valuing more time with family and friends over an ever higher, chasing an ever higher salary. I mean, I think that's a valid lens to see the world. I think those are values that are worthwhile.
That's not the point. The point is that, and in fact, if you want research, AAUW has been doing this research for many, many years, decades, and you can go and look at it, and their research is pristine, as well as PayScale does incredibly helpful research year after year after year, and they really get into some of the nuggets and where there are fewer disparities in the very higher level pay levels and things like that. So there is plenty of research out there that validates what I said, that in fact the pay disparities that are quoted on Equal Pay Day have to do with equal jobs, equal pay for equal jobs, equal time and experience. And it's not that women choose a different kind of position. We're talking about the pay gap in relevant jobs that are really the same. Is it equal pay for equal jobs? That's what we're talking about. And I think anybody who tries to say differently just hasn't. Apparently, she hasn't looked at the research, because it is definitely out there, and certainly the disparities for women of color are immense and totally need to be rectified. And it both has to do with bias in the system, systemic bias, and also with acculturation that causes us to ask for less than what we deserve. And that's where I think we really need to apply ourselves, is let's make sure we know our worth. Let's make sure we ask for it.
Yeah, I do know that Inez does spend a lot of time researching studies, and so I think the one point of agreement that I did hear from both of you ladies is about negotiation and helping women to make sure to do their research and do their homework and come armed at the table. You're a success story of that working.
Well, kind of.
Well, for this role,
kind of.
Now,
little, yes,
but if you
now
had done
I
it at the
am
beginning,
a little bit. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Inez, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks, Gloria. Appreciate it.
Thank you.